Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Vipul Gokulani, convener of D Genius Group, which is a group of young diabetologists from India under the umbrella of Diabetes India. And today's program is very much different. It is do it yourself, that is DIY dipping between insulin pump and continuous glucose monitoring. And for that, we have today's moderator, Dr. Kunal Javeri, who is also from Ahmedabad, the western part of India. And today's our speaker is Mr. Tim Street, who is from UK. Over to you, Dr. Kunal.
Thank you so much, Rutul. Good evening, friends who have joined across the globe. I welcome all of you for this live streaming and very, very important thing. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Rutul and the team entire D Genius and RX events for making this possible because virtual platforms are need of our now because we can connect with each other very easily. And today we have panelists. We have Dr. Arun Shankar from Thiruvananthapuram. Dr. Fidroz Sheikh would be joining us at any point of time. She's from Mumbai. We have Dr. Akanksha already joined from Surat. And we have Ms. Mahek Dhingra from New Delhi, who has also joined. So I welcome all of you for this session. And I will not come in between for this wonderful person, Team Street. We have team. We welcome we welcome you from the bottom of the heart for wonderful innovation you have done. And I was going through your blog yesterday morning, and I must congratulate you that you have make it prove that the need, the necessity is the innovation, is the mother of innovation, right? So I want coming in between all of you. I will be having discussion once the talk is over. So Team Street is going to share his experience for upcoming hour for DIY looping. He's from UK and very well-known personality. Those people who have hear him in the past or who have been using somebody the devices which he has innovated and contributed. So let's hear from him. And sir, Mr. Team, all up to you now. The platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Kunal. I've got a presentation to talk through whilst I'm going through, so I'll share that, and then we can get started. One thing I'll just apologise for, I've got my dogs in the room with me, so you may occasionally either see a face or hear some heavy panting. It's not me, it's a chocolate Labrador. Let me start off by sharing my presentation. I can't because the host has disabled the screen.
Just Nira, the technical team, can you please give Tim the option to share the screen? You will have to give him the rights to share the screen as co-host.
Thank you.
And by the time the technical team does it, I'll be requesting all the participants who are there to keep their mics muted so that we can hear team very clearly. Please keep your questions in mind ready because we might be running short of time in the later part. And I want the open forum discussion for benefit of other people who have joined also across the globe, right? So Tim, as soon as you are ready, please let us know.
Okay, let me just get that up. Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
Now it is visible. Please, Tim, you may continue now.
Okay. Actually, I think you've got multiple things you can see, haven't you, at the moment?
Yes, we can see these slides now. DIY looping.
Can you see two slides, or can you see one slide? Because I think I might have shared the narrator's view rather than the actual slide.
We are getting the viewer's view. Presenter's view we are not getting your view.
So right. We are all set. We are good to go.
Okay then. So this is going to be a brief talk about DIY looping, open source automated insulin delivery systems. I'll talk a little bit about what's available. I'm going to take a step back and go into what that means before we go into that, and then we will talk about what's available, what you can use, why you might pick different things, and my experiences of them. So who am I? Well, I've had type 1 diabetes for nearly 35 years. I have been using open source user-led innovation in diabetes technology since the middle of the noughties. I write diabetic.com, which Kunal's already mentioned. And of course, I have a full-time job outside of anything to do with the DIY world. I have, as I mentioned, the dogs, family, all of the other things that everybody else has who gets on with life as well. So let's start off with the question, what is DIY? DIY, do it yourself. Why? Well, this is the idea, looping. As we have modified the definition of looping to mean to use an automated insulin delivery system to maintain optimal glucose levels. And if there is anybody watching who doesn't know what that is, it's where a signal is received from a CGM system, an algorithm runs somewhere, makes decisions, and then instructs a pump to deliver insulin to manage those glucose levels. This is a very old slide where you have separate CGM receiver control algorithm device. In many cases now, all of that sits on the pump, but in the DIY world, generally it sits on the phone. And why might we do it? Well, the first open source systems came to life in about 2015 when there were no commercial systems. People had got fed up of waiting and knowing that the technology was available, that you could plug it together and you could make an automated insulin delivery system. So they wanted to do that. And I got involved in early 2016 with some of the technologies that allowed you to take a G4 Dexcom and connect that to a phone. And it swiftly followed that I started to use algorithms to help me manage my diabetes before finally building one of these systems in the summer of 2016. Before I go into this, I'm just going to mention commercial options because it is worth talking about what they are, what they do, how they work. And then when we talk about the automated system, the open source systems, it's a bit easier. So at the moment, when I put these slides together, Omnipod 5 was on its way. It hadn't arrived. It has now. These are the commercial systems that are available in different parts of the world. And they all operate in slightly different ways, but do more or less the same thing. Some of them are allowed to give extra boluses. Some of them aren't. Many of them use some form of machine learning in order to figure out how best to deliver adjustments based on glucose levels. And perhaps more importantly, some of them sit on phones, some of them sit on pumps. They've got different kind of physical manifestations of them. All of them require mealtime management. You have to bolus and enter carbs for meals. And off the back of that, many of them require you to put in some form of your own profile, which they then adapt. And it's worth bearing that in mind because in some cases that adaptation works very well, in some cases it doesn't. And particularly with Tandem, if you don't have a very well defined profile, it can be quite difficult to use. And we'll talk about that again in a moment. So open source options, DIY as they were formerly known, there are quite a few of these available now, and they almost uniformly, the way people use them now is a phone-based algorithm that sits on either an iPhone or an Android phone. Some key points about these systems is that they are built and installed by an end user. And the reason that happens is for legal reasons. None of these devices have been approved as medical devices, so the various medical device regulations globally don't allow them to be distributed as either as something that's available in an app store because they're not an approved medical device. And if you were to distribute them, dependent upon which country or region you were in, you would be liable for breaching those particular rules. And if you breach those rules, there are potential fines, jail time, that kind of stuff, which is why it's built by the end user. It relies on your pump settings, and this means that you need to have done a good job of sorting those out. If your profile is all over the place, unfortunately, DIY systems are not going to be the best option for you because it's quite difficult to make them work effectively. But they all have extensive customization and automation tools. And because they're open source, people like me can go away and play with them and do other things with them. And we'll also come on to that shortly. Right now, out in the wild, there are a number of different systems. The ones we're going to focus on here run on the phones. Android APS, which is what I use. I've taken Android APS. I know the algorithm very well, and I've modified it to make it more effective for what I wanted. Android APS is probably the most interoperable of all of these systems. It runs on multiple different pumps. It runs with multiple different CGM systems. Effectively, run what you brung is the expression here. You can use pretty much anything. That is not an extensive list of the CGMs anymore. Additional ones that have come to market recently are also supported within the platform. There's also the EOFlow pump is being tested before that goes into the master release of this. So there's lots of pumps, lots of CGM, highly extensible. It just requires somebody to get on and write the drivers to make it work. It's an implementation of the OREF1 algorithm, which Dana Lewis and Scott Librand built back in 2014-15. And to my mind, that's the best algorithm to use for an open source system because I think it's the strongest. And I'll talk about that later on. If you don't run an Android phone, you have two other options. There is Loop, which is the basis of which Tidepool took to create their approved system. And Loop has a very pretty user interface. Lots of people love it. I personally find that the OREF1-based systems generate a better outcome for me, and therefore I don't use Loop. I also have migrated onto Android now, so I'm not interested in using an iPhone. Loop runs with the Minimed pumps via this little box called a Riley link. It also runs with the Omnipod Dash, which it connects to via Bluetooth. The supported CGMs are Dexcom's G5, G6, and G7 on the iPhone with the Dexcom app. And then if you use an alternative third-party piece of software, you can use an alternative CGM system. So that's Loop. If people like that, they can use it. Now, we also have had into the We Are Not Waiting community relatively recently in the last sort of 12 months or so, another system, and that system is IAPS. IAPS started life as something called FreeAPSX. The guy who was developing it has kind of stepped away and it's been taken over by a bunch of other people. And this is an implementation of the OREF1 algorithm, so the same thing that's running in Android APS, but on the iPhone. And it supports these pumps. I realized I hit the capital for the 7, so you've got a G ampersand there. That should be a G7. Again, those CGMs are natively supported within IAPS. IAPS has all of the stuff that you'd expect from OREF1, and then has also got a few of the pieces of work that people have been doing in the Android APS world to look at things like dynamic ISF, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. And if you've seen these three things come up, there's also still around is OpenAPS. OpenAPS runs on a small computer. I say a small computer, we're talking an Intel Edison. You haven't been able to buy them new now for about 5 years. If you can get one, it's an option. You need a load of things to communicate with a Medtronic pump to use it. I think most people have now migrated onto one of these other systems. OpenAPS is, of course, the reference design that Scott and Dana put together in the first place. And the core algorithm in IAPS and Android APS comes from that. So if you've got these options available, like I had, which one do you choose? Now, I spent a lot of time testing both of them. And whilst Loop has a prettier interface and it has an Apple Watch integration, and Tidepool did base their system on it, for me, the key thing, reason for using an automated engineering delivery system is to reduce the amount of effort I have to make to do something around my diabetes. That's fundamentally why I think I would want to use, that's why I wanted to use OpenAPS 8 years ago. In the OREF1 world, whilst it's available on multiple different types of devices these days, and it's got a much wider range of implementation choices in terms of interoperability, there has been some study of the two algorithms between Loop and OREF1 done by academics on pigs. Why choose pigs? Well, if you choose pigs, pigs can't use a phone. So if you put both of them on a pig, the pigs who are using Loop can't intervene about their meal times, and neither can the pigs who are using Android APS. So what they did was they ran Android APS and Loop side by side on this set of pigs and wait to see what happened. Loop had fewer percentage time in range. It was about 40-45%. OREF1, again, this is no intervention, was about 60-65%. So there was quite a significant difference there. And that's why if anybody asks me, I would generally point them at the OREF1 based stuff, because you don't have to do as much to get a decent time in range. And additionally, there are multiple advanced variants available now that people have developed on top of OREF1 because it's reasonably extensible. I think the downside of that is that to get it to that level, there are more settings to adjust, and perhaps the interface isn't as pretty as Loop's. But look, the most important thing is that people pick something that they like and would want to use. And if that interface on Loop encourages somebody to use it, then they should use it, because they'll get better outcomes than if they didn't use it. That's the key thing there. Now, I mentioned advanced variants, and this is what I use. I use Boost, the one in the middle there. A number of us have been trying to extend the functionality of the algorithms within Android APS. There's a system called Advanced Insulin Management Interface that a gentleman in France has written. And that's an experimental version that uses a neural net to do machine learning. The idea is that around meals, you just give yourself a bolus, then it manages it. It uses additional sensors in terms of step counts and heart rate to determine things like stress, exercise, etc., and modify how it behaves. That's very early stages. It's very experimental. There are quite a few people testing it, and they seem to be getting good results. I use Boost, which is my own version of Android APS, and what my intention there was to identify patterns in glucose levels that allowed you to determine whether or not there was a meal, and if there is a meal, react accordingly. Now, it's designed to work with Lyumjev, really, and then it does work with FIASP as well, so that you don't have to bolus for meals, and it only postprandially boluses. It uses this functionality I mentioned earlier called Dynamic ISF, which is something I worked with Chris Wilson on, to adjust sensitivity within the algorithm based on glucose levels, having observed that at higher glucose levels, you tend to need more insulin to drop your glucose by 18 milligram per litre per deciliter compared to at a lower glucose level. So it's got all of these things in it, and the idea of that is to try and get people to step away. The results that people I know who've been using that are pretty good. It's kind of in the 90% time in range zone, which isn't bad for not actually touching or doing anything. There are also a couple of other versions out there. Eating Now, which is something that a gentleman in Australia has put together to make meals easier with kids. Auto ISF uses the profile-based sensitivity data and then adjusts based on glucose levels. So all of these things are looking to try and make living with diabetes even easier than the DIY stuff does already. And with OpenAPS, then Android APS, then Boost, I've been able to consistently achieve a time in range of around about 85% for the last 8 years without having to do as much work. And for me, that's been ultimately the most important thing in all of this, is not having to do any work to get there. And that's kind of without going into vast amounts of detail and probably saving that for the questions afterwards in the conversation, what I want to say about the open source world, really, that this stuff is all out there. The last page of this presentation has a load of links on that take you to the documentation for the various systems, so people can screenshot it and then go and use them, or you can share the presentation and they can use them as directly as links. But the first place to go, if you're interested in doing any of this stuff, is here. This is the book that Dana wrote, Artificial Pancreas book, and it's a book about automated insulin delivery. It's a great introduction to doing any kind of automated insulin delivery, and it helps you to understand how things work, what you need to think about when you're doing it, and how you put this stuff together, whether you're doing it with a commercial system or whether you're doing it with an open source system. Fantastic place to start. The second are these links. These are links to the Android APS, Loop, OpenAPS, and IAPS documentation, all freely available. Go ahead and use them. And then some of the articles I've written and that Dana's written about looping in general using open source systems. And finally, there are a number of loop groups on Facebook, which are also fantastic resources. So with that, I'll cease my screen sharing.
Yes, Tim, thank you so much. And first of all, I think from bottom of our heart, from millions of people, I think this is the basis where we are actually entering into the AI-based technologies, which are really helping the end person, the end users. And perhaps this is the first time in the world where we are looking that the biggest companies who have FDA approval, who have insurance approval, are perhaps lagging behind in innovations, which perhaps people have been doing. That's why I said in the initial talk that the necessity is the innovation, is the mother of innovation, right? So before I put the forum open, I just have one little question, and then I will keep the rotational forum open. Tim, what exactly you feel now that the future of these systems is likely to go forward? How exactly you feel that it is going to go away? What is the way ahead now for benefiting the people?
The open source.
Yeah, so open source AIs, do you feel so that the people like Medtronic and all these bigger giants are going to incorporate into their loops, and it will be easily available?
That's great. That's what we want, right? So the open source systems show what you can do. So Boost, which is the one I know intimately, looks at step count to tell you, to know whether you are being inactive, which means it needs to decrease your insulin sensitivity, whether you're active.
Right. So it is very much expected. In fact, when we had seen that the Tandem people, when they got the FDA approval, they actually got the very biggest jump into the stock market in US. So any system which are at present not FDA approved, perhaps people are feared of that I'm using something which is not approved by FDA, and that is the reason why people, even though know that it is great to use, but there is a lot of fear inside their mind. So I'll be starting, and I think the team is not there with us for some technical issues, but I'm just keeping the forum open. So if anybody have any question, you can please feel free to ask. Dr. Akanksha, I will start with Dr. Akanksha. If you have any question to put forward, if team can hear us, the people in the team from the RX events, if you can communicate with.
When we have less.
Till team joins, we have Mehak, who has quite a good experience of Open APS, Android APS, so she can answer, I guess.
Yes, Meg, you can also share your experience to the viewers, that what exactly is the matter and how should people deal with it.
Sure. So first, Dr. Akanksha, you can go with your question, and then I'll share my experience.
No, you can please go ahead first. Let's hear about you. And then
Mr. Team is for some technical reason is not in the meet right now. As soon as he joins, we'll be putting the questions open by
yes,
Arthur. You can also share here.
Yes.
I have been using DIY Loop from 2020, and in India, people are using DIY Loop from 2017. Personally, we all know that it is not FDA approved, so we are facing some issues. But the biggest problem in India is not only FDA approval. The only pump that is compatible with DIY loop is available is Medtronic in India. That too, Medtronic has stopped the production of the pump compatible with DIY loop. So we have our own struggles. Right now, some of us, obviously, we purchased our pumps. I think this last year only they stopped the production of the DIY compatible loop because they wanted to sell their 780G, which became a biggest hindrance to bring the success of DIY loop. And if I have to compare DIY loop in terms of management and control, like I am also using Android APS, the same Tim said, definitely it is way, way better than using 780G. Though I have a strong belief that loop or any technology available alone won't suffice. Obviously, we need a lot of other things also to work with it. Now coming to cost. In India, cost is also one very big factor that deters us from taking any kind of decision. Why people of my age are more comfortable with DIY loop compared to 780G? It's because DIY loop costs me hardly 2.25 lakh or max to max 3 lakhs in extreme cases. That too, if I'm using, let's say, iOS loop. But when I come to 780G, the minimum it is costing me is 5.5. The cost of DIY loop in compared to my monthly cost of DIY loop is comparatively less than what is my monthly cost in terms of using 780G. Then DIY loop gives me better control. It's something in my hand. I have built it. I have gone through. So we all know we are 780G. A lot of you might be recommending 780G. Generally, what happens? A Medtronic representative goes, installs 780G to the customer and comes back, and that's it. The work is done. In DIY loop, if I have to put a DIY loop, first I build it on my own. Then there is a compulsory training that I need to go through. So when I go through those compulsory training, my own concepts of insulin carb ratio, of insulin sensitivity factor, how much the insulin time of insulin work, all of these concepts are clear. So I have more control of how these things are working on my body. But in 780G, this is the biggest missing point. Nobody is giving us the training. Even people who are using 780G, they are still struggling. Children using 780G still have their HbA1cs in 7 and 8. While I being in loop, DIY loop, my HbA1c is always below 6.5. My time in range is more than 90%. My time below range is less than 3%, which is a very big achievement. Now coming to you all being a doctor, obviously there is certain restriction of recommending DIY loops, which we understand and totally respect. But it's time that we all need to come together and call for the need of bringing DIY loop and Android APS to the system. Yeah.
Thank you, Mehak. And now, team, I will just brief you. I think for some technical issues, you were out of the talk. So Mehak have been using the system which we are discussing. And she's so happy that her HbA1c is not 7.5, but she has tried to make it up to the mark as per the desired. Time in range is above 90%, and time below range is usually by 3%, less than 3%. So that's a very big thing. But unfortunate part in India, that the only thing which is available commercially here is Medtronic 780G, where perhaps the training, which Mehak said, that is not as good enough. The insulin carb ratios, the awareness of the hypoglycemia or steps, and the requirement of the reduction in the insulin doses, and so many things that are required to understand the timings of insulin, the pattern of action of insulin, everything has to be understood. Perhaps that part is also lacking. And again, the extensive training which is done has to be available for every people across the caste, creed, and languages in the world. So I just briefed what Mehak said, and I'm just putting this in the open forum. Dr. Akanksha, if you have any question or suggestion to have words with team or anybody.
So I've also shared this link to many of my type 1 diabetic patients who are on pump. So I would just want Tim to give them an insight how the loop is going to help them in clear words. the difference between the closed loop and the open loop. That is what they want to understand, basically. So please give us some limelight on that, and then I'll proceed with a few more questions that I have in my mind. And because you have been a user of it now, the DIY loop, so you can just help us with those insights, please.
Yeah. So I think the key thing that the use of an open source system, of a closed loop system, is that you no longer have to think about how to keep yourself in range. And that's the key thing. It's that it takes the burden of checking CGM, checking finger pricks, whatever it would be, CGM, checking CGM and doing something out. And the way I like to put this in context, I spent a day where I took away the closed loop and I purely did what I used to do before I used the closed loop. And and I counted how many times I looked at CGM and made a decision. And a decision is either you do something or you don't do something, but in both cases, it's a decision. And I realized over the course of the day, I probably glanced at my CGM whilst I was awake, something in the order of 180 times. And every time I did that, I made a decision. And the the closed loop takes that 180 decisions and turns it into how much do I bolus when I have a meal, and that's it. And that's really the difference. It's not the large number of times you look at stuff and make a decision. It takes all of that away, and all you then need to do with the closed loop systems that are available is make a decision at a meal time, and that's basically the difference between an open loop and a closed loop.
Thank you.
So anybody, Dr. Arun Shankar, if you can hear us, if you have to share any words. Yes, Dr. Arun, just unmute yourself. Yeah, please.
Yeah,
any question, any suggestions? Yes, you are audible.
Sorry that in between I had to go for some emergency at home. So that's why I missed the discussion in between. So I want to ask Tim regarding like we are seeing like what Mehak has explained in detail, that like the importance of DIY and how it is being properly used by so many our own patients and getting HbA1c levels, that too the time in range being maintained without any significant hypoglycemia. Still, what is the challenge, the most important challenge we can come across while the patient goes for DIY?
So I think people who go for DIY are going to be a certain type of patient. I think we have to admit that. There are some great resources to help people understand how the systems work, how you build the system, how to do all of this. But the biggest challenge is getting over that first hurdle. It's taking the step to go, okay, I'm going to build it. And now, maybe not Android APS, but Loop and IAPS allow you to build the system online in a kind of a sandbox. So you don't need to, you don't actually need to own a Mac to build those things. Android APS, you can build it on any system you want with free tools, but it's that hurdle of building it that for most people who decide to go down the DIY loop, that is the first big step. And if they can overcome that, great, they're on the way. And the second one is about how they set them up. And as I mentioned during the presentation, these open source systems are wholly relying on your profile settings to work properly. So the best advice that anybody in a healthcare position can give to a patient is around configuring their insulin sensitivity, their carb ratio, and their basal profile optimally, because you don't need to know anything about an open source system to do that. You can help somebody understand basal testing, understand sensitivity factor testing, understand carb ratio testing, how they arrive at those numbers without ever having touched an open source system. And you guys have all got knowledge and experience and know how to help people do that on a pump. And that's fundamentally important in an open source system. So if people have come to you and said they're going to do it, help them understand that what they've got in place is right, and if it's not, how they get to that point. Experience with the system, if they can do that. And those are probably the two things.
Thank you, team. And I request Dr. Firdaus Sheikh if you can hear us and if you have any comments or question to discuss.
Yeah, hi. It was a very nice presentation, Mr. Tim. My question is for Akansha. Akansha, right? Who is the ROI patient.
Mehek.
Sorry. So Mehek, my question is, so in many countries, the medical devices which are used, they have to undergo strict government compliance, and they have to undergo through many governmental agencies. What are the legal implications in India? Does it have any legal implications in India? The impact of insurance coverage or support from healthcare professionals?
No. So our government is as unaware about DIY loop as it is about type 1 diabetes. So I would like to say, no, we don't, unfortunately, we don't have any insurance coverage. Also, in what I've heard in UK also, there are certain devices that are covered through insurance, whereas Riley and Meow Meow are, so these are so to do DIY loop also, we need a Riley link, we need a Meow Meow that converts the CGM waves to the Bluetooth waves. Meow Meow, Riley, they are not covered by insurance. Though government right now is coming up with these CGS schemes, which is only for the CGS patient, they are covering insulin pump and CGMs, which is a good start. At least they are starting to look at the need of the patient. But otherwise, there is no insurance coverage. Legal, there is just one person I came across who is actually legally trying to work on the legal usage of insulin pumps in India. However, I don't think anybody, in fact, most of the hospitals also, I'm sorry to say, most of the hospitals also don't understand what is insulin pump. It is only doctors who are actively working in type 1 know what insulin pump is, or doctors who I should say are updating themselves, which I am proud to see you people here. It is my privilege to know that at least doctors are willing to do this. So it's very difficult to say we don't, it's very unfortunate, in fact, to say we don't have anything like insurance coverage for any of the insulin pump, and DIY loop is far forgotten.
Also, Mehek, what about the limitation on device choices?
We have only one device, that is Medtronic 2 devices. We have Medtronic 715 and 722. Now, we all know that there are people who are importing Omnipod and Tandem from other places. So that is there. Otherwise, in India, only Medtronic 715 and 722 are available. And CAM APS is coming, so hopefully that will help us.
Well, I had just one technical question that you have been using. This is for both of you, team and Mehek. That what are the technical glitches which you feel in day-to-day using of these devices? Like Bluetooth miscommunication, the sensors. Many times we have seen that false low have been shown by many a times for some or other reason. So what's your take on that? Multiple devices, multiple Bluetooth. So, for example, if you go to a community meet where a lot of type 1 diabetes are there, and if you see people have been using different devices, do you see glitches in the technical? Because that can be a fatal if your sensor is receiving signals from somewhere else, or it does not receive signal at all. I have heard that for Tandem people in US who have been using this, that if they apply a device, the CGM is on the left arm and the Tandem the sensor is on the right side to receive the signals many times, because the signal facing is on the top of the loop, top of the device. So many times there is miscommunication, because this could be fatal. See, type 1 diabetes is something 24/7 management is required. You can't go excessive insulin. You cannot afford to be off eventually. So do you see any loopholes which are really there, which are straight, and you need to communicate to the people who have been joining?
Let's take a step back and start with the point you made there about sensor communications with devices. CGM sensors are notorious. Whether that's reliable or unreliable is a different question. I think one of the key things in regard to the point you make about the Tandem and the Dexcom is it actually relates to the Bluetooth setup on the phones that you're using. So when I've been using a Samsung phone to run my closed loop system, and I've experienced very few communication issues between the Dexcom system and the phone. I've also run it on some of the Xiaomi phones, and they're pretty widely available in India, as far as I understand it. I know people who've been running on the Poco and Redmi devices, and those again seem to have very strong Bluetooth stacks. So those are things, I think those are pretty good. I know that the Libre 2, some people have experienced a lot of problem with the Libre 2 communicating with the phone. And again, that seems to be phone dependent. So I think the challenge is that what you need to communicate to people is they need to talk to the community and find out which phones work well with the system they want to use and which ones don't. Now, if you're using an iPhone, then kind of you're a bit caught anyway. It's an iPhone, and you kind of have to use what you've got. But if you're using an Android phone, there are definitely some phone brands that work better than others. And right now, one of the cheaper Samsung phones doesn't work at all with the Dexcom devices. I don't know how well it works with the Libre devices after they did an update, and it's just killed. This is the Samsung A series. The Samsung updates just killed all communication with CGMs. So in that context, it's worth looking at the community and speaking to the community and seeing what the community is saying about devices and interoperability, because there are definitely some challenges in relation to that. Generally, if you're looking at the cheaper devices, then the Xiaomi brands do work quite well in that respect. I think the comment you're making about false lows is a widely known thing in the community. When you lie on a sensor overnight, you get a compression low, and there's nothing you can do about it. In general, it doesn't affect the functioning of the devices particularly too badly. I mean, most compression lows are a short period of time, sort of 15 minutes to 30 minutes, and then recover from that. So the drop-off and recovery of the data usually means that it manages the insulin okay anyway in the background to that. So it's not such a big deal, but it's something that people who are using commercial systems as well as DIY systems need to be aware of, because the same problem affects all sensors. It's not exclusive to DIY systems. In fact, anything that affects CGM is not exclusive to DIY systems. I think that's the key thing there. Is anything that's sensor-based, the problems occur with both the DIY and the commercial systems. I don't think there are any. I don't think there are any specific technical issues that I would align with DIY systems. I think the key thing there goes back to what I was saying earlier about getting your profile set up well and then being able to operate from there. Mehak, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would like to add. So, Dr. Kunal, I think your question is regarding excess insulin delivery. There is a feature, a very good feature on Android APS, where you put the upper limit of insulin delivery. So I like my upper limit is put to 5 units. So no matter what, it will not allow me to give, even by mistake, it will not give me insulin above 5 units. Similarly, we have the option of alarms. So even as soon as my sugars go low, my phone will start giving me the alarms. So if I start getting the alarms, the first sensible thing, even if anybody's on CGM, we tell is to cross-check. So that's what even DIY loop people do. They cross-check. If it is true, we follow it. Now, you were saying regarding cross communication, that is not happening because there are coding of our devices that are linked. In my loop, I have put my device number, my device serial number, everything is used as per my device only. So that way it is very safe. Some other, like motor failure, is a common technical glitch in pump, which is without DIY loop also. Other technical failures, like if my pump's battery gets over, it's again a technical failure. Now, one thing, suppose let's say the entire loop system shuts off due to Night Scout not working. I'm just giving one odd example that one of the communicator fails and entire loop system shuts down. Still, what will happen? Our insulin pump will go back to its normal mode, and still the insulin delivery will keep happening the way it was happening in normal mode. Only thing that will not happen is the smart feature of the pump, the app, that is the algorithm, which automatically calculates and gives the insulin will stop. Otherwise, all other things will continue working. Am I correct, Tim?
Yes, you are. That's the key. One of the key design features of open source systems is that, and actually the same is true of CAM-APS, which also runs as an app on a phone. And I assume similarly when Tandem make their Mobi pump available with the app running on the phone, if you lose the communication with the phone, the default is that all of the adjustments that are made to the pump have a maximum period of time after which it falls back to the standard basal pattern on the pump.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So the recent ADA, the presentation by Dana, there was a slide discussing on the reporting bias, where the timing range, the maximum timing range being focused, but at the same time, the average timing range would be different. So what's your comment regarding that?
That's a fair comment, right? I mean, one of the reasons that I built the boost algorithm modifications on top of ORF1 was the idea there is that we know that if you use, so the pigs using Android APS had a timing range of around 60-65%. So the expectation is if you are working with Android APS and you didn't do anything, you'd get a 60-65% timing range of the users. If you did it with Loop, you'd expect a 40-45%. So with ORF1 as your core algorithm, you're expecting a 60-65% timing range, and anything above that is by virtue of what the user does. The idea of then taking ORF1, which can do that, and then sticking the boost modifications onto it and getting 85% timing range with no intervention is kind of the evolution of that. And that's the case. That's absolutely the case, is that if you don't do anything with ORF1, it will give you a decent timing range, and it's a timing range that is better than using a pump on its own in general. But you still need, and that's a pump, or it's about the equivalent of using a pump on its own with CGM and with a user carb counting properly and doing everything. So you make that comparison, you get, if you use Android APS and never bother doing any management, you get the same level of results as though you're using a pump and doing all the management. So whilst the reporting is self-selecting, potentially, we now have a baseline that we can put that against that says, okay, if you use an ORF1 based system and you don't do anything, you'll still get a timing range that is comparable with somebody who's not using a closed loop and doing everything as well. So that's kind of the way I would sort of step out of the view of it.
Okay, I had one question that we have heard that the South Korean company like EOPatch has been taken over by Maytronics. So
yes.
I personally don't have any experience in India. I have never heard anybody have been using it unless somebody has brought from there. But any experience at what was the future of that? So versus EOPatch or the pump or the DIY loop, what looks the promising and what looks the future?
So Android APS had actually been doing some work in the dev branch on the EOPatch pump, and it was supposed to be, it was supposed to be released in the next version. What will happen with that? we don't know, right? So somebody's done the work to make EOPatch. Somebody in Korea has done the work to make EOPatch available. There are Medtronic pumps that can be used with Android APS. There are Medtronic pumps that can be used with Loop and iAPS. Will Medtronic make changes to how EOPatch works so it will no longer be available with the system? We don't know. We just don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, what we do know is that in the past, they have been not necessarily the happiest that their systems have been being used with open source. So will they make changes? I would be very surprised if they didn't.
Right.
Thank you so much. And I keep the forum open for next 5 minutes for any questions if you have. Dr. Akanksha, if you have any questions, we can put forward, or any comments also or suggestions also.
So with respect to the traditional closed loop system that we have been using, I think the technical error, which could be again with any patient that we face, that the correction factor has to be very well addressed. If that is not being added well, again, the patient is not going to benefit, even if this patient is on DIY loop versus the traditional way of just the CGM and the insulin pump. One was this thing, and secondly, the audience should be also aware of a few facts regarding the advantage of DIY loop while the exercising protocols. When a type 1 is exercising or on any kind of heavy workouts, the DIY loops helps a lot. So you can just share some advantages in some circumstances where the DIY loop, closed loop, helps our patients.
Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. There are things you have to do when using a closed loop anyway, with regards to exercise. And I think that's actually no different whether you're using a DIY system or a commercial system.
Dr. Firdaus, any comments or questions to the audience?
Mehak, I have one question. What are the potential safety concerns for someone who's going to start on a DIY loop? And are there any security vulnerabilities in the sense if the software is not updated? Does it cause the system to underperform, or are there any security breaches that happen?
So I think your question is about access to the system and people's security when using it. I think
correct. Yeah.
There are many people using these systems and have been using them now for 8 or 9 years. So far, we haven't seen any breaches of the protocols. What you are able to do additionally, if you're using a DIY system, I'm just pulling up the preferences section on Android APS. There are things you can do to make it harder to deliver insulin from a phone. So you can do things like put in place an extra check with a PIN number or the system's PIN number before insulin is delivered. There are things like that. I've never heard of anybody hacking an Android APS user's system or a Loop user's system and then delivering insulin unexpectedly. I think that the issues associated with that are as likely to happen the only cases I've ever heard about where people have caused insulin to be delivered where it shouldn't have been been done on standard pumps where people had handsets available. And there was a case where somebody using a combo used the combo's available handset and over-delivered the insulin, and that was done by somebody externally, but it was externally in that they had access to the pump handset anyway. So I think the reality is that any system is open to abuse. And if somebody sets out to do it, they can. There are security protocols around remote access to the systems, which I know people want to do with children. Those are all available within the system itself, and a user should set those up, especially if they're using a remote overrides with a child. There are all sorts of security measures you can take in those contexts, and you should choose to use them if you are a parent working with a child, if you want that kind of additional involvement.
Right, Dr. Arun, I will take your words, and then Mehak, last 2-3 minutes, and then we'll be having the closing remarks. Yes, Dr. Arun.
Yeah, actually, we are so happy and delighted that after the usage of DIY, even though it's not an approved, but still so many patients are using, getting more and more better controlling glycemic status. But as doctors over here, Dr. Kunal, Dr. Akansha, Dr. Firdaus, Dr. Rutul, we are all concerned about patients' health condition as a whole, not only the glycemic part, which we are dealing with the usage of the approved one or the DIY. So my concern is, do we find anything difficult situation while the DIY being continued? Patients, at least some of them won't be getting in touch with the treating team. Are there any concerns?
Tim has in UK, they have a protocol. They'll not get supplies if they don't meet their GB, right, Tim?
Yes and no. I think there are protocols around it. Wait, leave. Sorry, the dog's just come in and is trying to steal something. There are that comment regarding accessing supplies and GP's point of view on them. It's a challenge. You are expected to communicate with your healthcare professionals, and if you don't, then it does make it more challenging for them to say continue to do that. But it doesn't. It's not a requirement that you do it by doing it on going in and meeting them. You can do it over the phone. They just want to make sure that they are getting the right level of oversight dealing with their patients. And in many cases, that is a kind of a safety thing. If you're not seeing patients and you've got no visibility of what's going on, whether you're using a commercial system or a non-commercial system, if you can't see it, how do you know that? If you've got no visibility of what's happening, how do you know that it's being used safely? Whether that's using a closed loop system or simply an injection.
Yeah. So, Dr.
Make your closing remarks, and then I will go back to Rutul, and we'll have a vote of thanks. Yeah.
So, Dr. Arun, I'll just answer. I understand the concern being in India because there is no system regarding seeing doctor. There is no compulsion, and everything is available easily. I want to tell you one thing what I have worked out. My doctor is very accepting of my DIY loop. He never recommends anything, but he always asks me question about how the system works. And this makes me more motivated for going to him. After every 3 months, I get my HbA1c done and I go and talk to him that this is what I've achieved. Then we talk about my ICR, ISF. So that's the system we have created with the doctor. If the doctors simply say, okay, DIY loop, I don't know, you manage it on your own, I think the person will get demotivated. So you might not be actively involved in DIY looping, but people who are doing DIY looping, they have taken the training. You can ask more questions, get them involved in the system, because anyways, we all know that diabetes is not about just one factor. We have to be overall healthy. We have to take care of cardiovascular, macrocardiovascular diseases. So obviously, diabetes is a holistic approach that we need to manage.
Fine, thank you everyone. And Rutul, any comments from your end before we just close the meeting, because the time is already running.
Thank you everyone for being here, and I'm really happy that we all together just want to be on one page, that we want to improve the health of the people with type 1 diabetes who are living, and team has done fabulous job, and where we doctors do not need to look upon everything and all the time. And you are you are taking care of those people with type 1 diabetes. And thank you very much, everyone, again. I'm in one of the conferences, so I'm not able to hear you properly. So thank you again, and goodbye. Have a good night, and we'll be coming up with another new topic next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks, Rutul. Thanks, team, for sparing your valuable time. All the panelists and all the people who have joined us on the Facebook group. So I end the remarks by saying the words that the more than 100 years of insulin innovation, almost 60 years now, if 1963 to 23, and lot of things are going to go ahead. We don't know what the future is going to be, but now we have to make sure that the world will be a better and safer place for type 1 diabetes by using of technologies in the ethical way. And let's hope these small meetings will contribute something to the humanity in the world of people of type 1 diabetes suffering, because these are the people who require 24/7 care. Very few chronic diseases are there, but you cannot have a loophole. So let's create our hands together, and these technocrats, the people who are living with these technologies and diabetologies, get motivated and come on a platform. So thanks a lot, and kudos to DGenius also, where across the world we are making an awareness, particularly the Indian doctors now also taking interest into this. Thank you so much, and with that we are signing off. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mehek.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Goodbye.
Dr.
Good
Rutul,
night.
for getting us all together.
Have a wonderful day.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks,
And
thanks, team. Goodbye.
Wonderful.